It happened at exactly 3:12 a.m. The motion sensor lights flared to life, the night exploded with shrieks, and there she was, Linda Patterson, HOA president, writhing in my garden bed, clawing at her tongue and screaming with a voice that could shatter glass. "Why is it on fire?" The answer? Because she just ate a raw ghost pepper straight off the vine. And because she couldn't stop stealing my damn vegetables. I'm Jake Morrison, 34, high school biology teacher and part-time tomato whisperer. When I moved into Maple Ridge Estates, I thought I'd finally found the perfect blend of quiet living and backyard gardening. The house was modest but charming, with a south-facing yard that got perfect sun for growing practically anything. Then came Linda. HOA tyrant, clipboard warrior, and full-time menace in orthopedic sandals. She took issue with everything I planted, sprouted, or even thought about growing. "Your carrots are not HOA compliant in height," she declared on my third week, measuring my baby vegetables with an actual ruler. Raised beds are considered unapproved permanent structures according to Section 12.4. She waved her clipboard like a weapon. "We don't do squash here. It attracts rabbits, and rabbits attract coyotes, and coyotes attract chaos." Linda believed that personal produce was a shared community experience. In other words, she stole my crops every night and called it rotational gleaning for the betterment of neighborhood aesthetics. First it was the heirloom tomatoes. I'd wake up to find the ripest ones missing, leaving behind only the green ones that wouldn't be ready for weeks. Then the zucchini disappeared overnight, despite being the size of baseball bats and clearly not ready for harvest. Then my prized sweet corn vanished, one by one, as if taken by produce-loving poltergeists with a taste for barely mature vegetables. I started noticing muddy footprints in my garden bed, size 7.5 with a distinctive orthopedic sole pattern. I installed a security camera, hidden behind my rain gauge and angled perfectly to catch the perpetrator. And there she was on the footage. Linda, 61 years old, sprinting across my yard at 2 a.m. with a canvas tote bag and headlamp like some kind of menopausal vegetable bandit. She moved with surprising stealth for someone who complained about her hip replacement at every HOA meeting. The video showed her methodically harvesting my best produce while muttering what sounded like grocery lists under her breath. I confronted her the next morning, armed with printed screenshots of her midnight raids. She examined the photos with the seriousness of a forensic investigator before claiming it was pre-approved for HOA beautification purposes. She cited Clause 14.7, which definitely does not exist since our HOA bylaws only go up to Clause 12. Then she threatened to fine me for hoarding nutrients that belong to the Collective Community Garden Initiative. There was no Collective Community Garden Initiative. Linda had just made that up on the spot. That's when I decided to plant ghost peppers. And I didn't tell anyone about their true identity. Ghost peppers, if you're not familiar, clock in at over 1 million Scoville units. That's weaponized jalapeno territory, hot enough to be used as actual weapons in some countries. I ordered the seeds online and planted them with the care of someone preparing a very spicy trap. I placed them strategically between the cherry tomatoes and basil, easy pickings for a certain HOA kleptomaniac with a taste for midnight gardening. I even labeled them Hungarian sweet peppers on a little garden marker, just to be petty. Hungarian sweet peppers are actually quite mild, practically candy compared to what I'd actually planted. 3 days later, Linda took the bait. The motion camera caught everything in glorious high definition, her face lighting up in victory as she spotted the bright red peppers, her hand reaching out with greedy anticipation, and then absolute chaos when she bit into what she thought was a sweet pepper but was actually nature's way of punishing vegetable thieves. She bit one, chewed thoughtfully for about 2 seconds, swallowed, froze completely, and then screamed loud enough to set off 3 car alarms, a German Shepherd, and what I'm pretty sure was a car alarm 2 blocks away. The security footage showed her hopping around my garden like she was performing some kind of ancient fire dance, desperately trying to spit out what she'd already swallowed while making sounds that didn't seem entirely human. The ambulance came within 15 minutes. Not for anything serious, just dehydration, hysteria, and what the EMT cheerfully described as spontaneous chilly regret. The paramedic mentioned it was the 4th ghost pepper incident that week in the county, which made me feel oddly proud of my contribution to local emergency services. Linda spent the rest of the night in the emergency room, explaining to increasingly amused medical staff how she'd accidentally consumed what was essentially edible lava while engaging in what she called community garden maintenance. When she recovered, Linda tried to report me to the HOA board for agricultural assault and weaponizing produce against fellow residents. But the bylaws, which she'd quoted incorrectly so many times before, had no mention of pepper types, spice levels, or any restrictions on what residents could grow in their own yards. In fact, several members of the board thanked me privately for my innovative approach to the Linda problem. Apparently, she'd also been stealing from their gardens too, taking their tomatoes, herbs, and even their decorative kale. At the next HOA meeting, someone brought chips and salsa made with my ghost peppers, clearly labeled as Jake's special recipe. Linda flinched so hard when she saw the bowl that she knocked over her folding chair and had to be helped up by 2 other board members. The meeting proceeded with unusual efficiency, and a new motion passed unanimously. Residents may plant any crops they choose in their designated garden spaces, but unauthorized harvests will be treated as trespassing and theft. A second motion also passed. Linda Patterson is banned from all communal compost bins and garden areas until further notice. She left the meeting red-faced, muttering about horticultural entrapment and biological warfare disguised as gardening. But the damage was done. The board had spoken, and Linda's reign of vegetable terror was officially over. 2 weeks later, she was voted out as HOA president by a margin of 43-2. The only votes in her favor came from herself and her sister, who lived 3 states away and shouldn't have been eligible to vote anyway. The ghost pepper incident became legendary in our neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down stopped by with homemade cookies and asked if I could teach her how to grow security vegetables. Even the mailman, Dave, started asking about my special peppers every time he delivered packages. Word spread through the subdivision like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to know the secret to stopping Linda Patterson's midnight raids on their gardens. But Linda wasn't finished. 3 days after the ER visit, she showed up at my door with a folder thick enough to use as a weapon. "I've been researching," she announced, her voice still slightly hoarse from the ghost pepper incident. "And I found 17 potential violations in your yard." She began reading from her list with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent way too much time on municipal websites. "Your garden hose is coiled counterclockwise, which violates aesthetic harmony standards. Your bird bath is 2 inches too close to the property line. And your tomato stakes are not regulation height according to county agricultural guidelines." I listened patiently while she recited her complaints, noting that most of them weren't even real violations. Linda had apparently spent her recovery time diving deep into obscure municipal codes, desperately searching for something, anything, that would give her power over my garden again. When she finished her presentation, I smiled and said, "That's fascinating, Linda. Would you like to try one of my new Carolina Reapers while we discuss this?" She turned pale and backed away from my door so fast she nearly tripped over her own orthopedic sandals. The next phase of Linda's campaign involved what she called community education. She began posting flyers around the neighborhood warning residents about dangerous agricultural practices and the hidden dangers of unregulated spice levels in home gardens. The flyers featured clip art of peppers with scary faces and text that read, "Protect your family from weaponized vegetables." Most residents threw them away, but a few kept them as conversation starters at dinner parties. Linda also tried to rally support at the local grocery store, approaching random shoppers in the produce section to warn them about the pepper menace in Maple Ridge Estates. The store manager eventually had to ask her to leave after she started following customers around, pointing at jalapenos and declaring them gateway peppers that lead to harder spices. The incident made it into the local newspaper's community section under the headline, "Local Woman Warns Against Spicy Produce." Things escalated when Linda discovered that I'd been sharing ghost pepper seeds with other neighbors. She called this agricultural terrorism and demanded an emergency HOA meeting to address what she termed the pepper crisis. Only 4 people showed up to the meeting, and 3 of them were there to ask me for gardening advice. Linda spent 45 minutes presenting a PowerPoint about Scoville unit regulations and the need for spice control in residential areas. Her presentation included a chart showing the heat levels of various peppers, complete with flame graphics and danger symbols. The final straw came when Linda hired a lawyer to explore her legal options. The consultation cost her $300, and the lawyer's professional opinion was that she had no case whatsoever. In fact, the lawyer suggested that Linda might want to consider the legal implications of her own actions, specifically the repeated trespassing and theft charges that could be filed against her. The lawyer also mentioned that filing frivolous lawsuits could result in sanctions and additional legal fees. Meanwhile, my garden had become a neighborhood attraction. People started taking evening walks that just happened to route past my yard, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous ghost peppers. I added a small sign that read, "Caution, extremely hot peppers, do not touch," which only made them more popular. Children would dare each other to get close to the pepper plants, and parents would use them as cautionary tales about respecting other people's property. The breaking point came during the annual neighborhood barbecue. I brought a batch of ghost pepper salsa, clearly labeled and placed far away from the regular condiments. Linda, apparently still harboring some kind of death wish, decided to prove that my peppers weren't as hot as everyone claimed. She loaded up a chip with the salsa and took a massive bite in front of at least 20 witnesses. The result was even more spectacular than the original garden incident. She spent the next hour alternating between drinking milk and declaring that I was trying to poison the entire neighborhood with my chemical warfare disguised as gardening. The HOA board had seen enough. At the next official meeting, they voted unanimously to remove Linda from her position as president. The vote was 47-1, with Linda casting the only vote in her favor. Board member Steve Patterson, who happened to be Linda's own nephew, cast his vote against her while shaking his head sadly. "Aunt Linda," he said, "you've gone too far this time. It's just peppers." Linda was also fined $800 for repeated trespassing and theft of personal property, plus an additional $500 for harassment and creating a public disturbance. When she received the certified letter with a combined fine of $1,300, she stood in her driveway and screamed loud enough that I could hear her from inside my house with the windows closed. She threw the letter on the ground, stomped on it twice, and then marched back inside while slamming her door so hard that her welcome mat flew off the porch and landed in her neighbor's yard.